From the towering Wasatch Mountains of the American Southwest, we welcome you to this episode of Undiscovered Utah. This show focuses on the mysteries that surround the rugged, difficult, and sometimes deadly American Southwest. I'm your host, JB, and to help with tonight's episode, we have a special guest. Please welcome Rook to the show. Rook was born in Alaska, but has lived most of his life in Utah. He is currently a student at UVU and is majoring in literary studies. In tonight's episode, we will be taking a trip back in time to the late 1800s, into the heart of the Wild West in Utah. This was a time of gunfighters, outlaws, miners, ranchers, and pioneers who braved the deserts and mountains to create new lives. We'll dive into the tales of conflicts, legendary outlaws, and the role that Utah played in the myths and realities of the American West. So saddle up because we're headed back into the frontier. To understand Utah's place in the Wild West, we need to set the stage. By the late 1800s, Utah was a unique land. It wasn't yet a state, it was still a territory, home to the Mormon pioneers who settled here in 1840 to escape religious persecution in the eastern United States. The land was arid, rugged, and isolated, but that didn't stop people from pouring in. Drawn by the promise of gold, silver, copper, land, and the biggest attraction, religious freedom.
The Utah Territory was formally established in 1850 with Fillmore as its capital. The territory saw steady growth, but it remained isolated, cut off by mountain ranges, deserts, and limited infrastructure. This isolation led to the development of self-sufficient communities that were resilient and resourceful. By the 1860s, the first railroads began linking Utah to the rest of the country, but even as civilization crept in, lawlessness and isolation held strong.
Utah's unique religious and cultural background made it different from other Western territories. Many of its settlers were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they aimed to build communities grounded in religious principles. However, the influx of non-Mormon settlers during the mining boom brought a new set of values and lifestyles, which often clashed with those of the established Mormon population. These differences would shape Utah's Wild West era. One of the most defining aspects of the Wild West era in Utah was the mining boom. Prospectors flocked to Utah searching for gold, silver, and copper. This led to the creation of boomtowns, makeshift settlements that sprang up overnight as miners chased the next big find.
In the 1860s and 1870s, areas like Park City, Silver Reef, and Eureka became mining hotspots. Park City was one of the biggest and most productive, with its mines producing silver and lead that attracted thousands. Silver Reef, another prominent mining town, was unique because it was one of the few places where silver was found in sandstone. These towns grew quickly, with saloons, hotels, stores, and even theaters popping up to accommodate the miners and the influx of wealth.
With the rapid influx of fortune seekers, these boomtowns also attracted their fair share of troublemakers. The lack of strong law enforcement meant that many disputes were settled with fists or guns, and saloons became notorious sites for brawls, gambling, and rowdiness. Life in these towns was hard, fast, and often violent, with fortunes won or lost overnight. No Wild West story would be complete without outlaws and the lawmen who pursued them. Utah was no exception. The state's vast deserts, canyons, and mountains provided ideal hiding places for outlaws escaping justice, and many became infamous.
One of the most notorious outlaw groups in the area was Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch. Butch Cassidy, born by Robert Leroy Parker, was originally from Utah. He grew up in a Mormon family but eventually turned to a life of crime. The Wild Bunch became famous for their bank and train robberies throughout the West, and Butch Cassidy became a legend. The canyons and mesas of Utah provided plenty of places to lay low between heists.
Then there was the legendary lawman Orrin Porter Rockwell, who was as much feared as he was respected, known as the Destroying Angel of Mormondom. Rockwell had a reputation for ruthlessness, especially when it came to defending the Mormon community from threats. Rockwell was a bodyguard for Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and worked as a marshal, tracking down criminals across the Utah Territory. While he was respected by many, he was feared by criminals and had a complex legacy of both a hero and a man willing to use extreme measures.
Porter Rockwell became a figure of legend, embodying the law and order ethos in an otherwise lawless land. Stories about him circulated widely, making him one of the best-known figures of Utah's frontier era. Some stories about Rockwell are likely exaggerated, but there's no doubt he played a major role in maintaining order in the wild Utah frontier.
The arrival of settlers in Utah had a profound impact on Native American tribes who had lived on the land for generations. The Ute, Paiute, Navajo, and Shoshone people had established lives and traditions on this land, but their way of life was disrupted by the influx of settlers.
Mormon pioneers and Native Americans initially attempted to establish peaceful interactions through trade and a belief that Native Americans were descendants of the Lamanites from the Book of Mormon. Compared to other white settlers, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints often tried to treat Native Americans with fairness, engaging in trade and offering assistance when needed. Significant cultural differences between the two groups often led to misunderstandings and, over time, some mistrust. As Mormon settlements expanded, tensions arose due to competing land claims and different views on land ownership. Notable conflicts like the Walker War and Black Hawk War involved clashes between Mormon militias and Native American tribes, primarily stemming from livestock theft and land disputes.
While Brigham Young advocated for peaceful relations, the implementation of these policies was not always followed and consequently led to devastating losses for the Native Americans.
These conflicts are a reminder of the human cost of westward expansion. While the Wild West is often romanticized, the reality was harsh and had profound consequences for Native American communities that still resonate today.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints played an influential role in Utah's development. The law enforcement often blended with church authority. The church's leadership, especially figures like Brigham Young, held considerable power and worked to maintain order in the territory.
The church's leadership established a system of community law enforcement that was grounded in the church's teachings. Leaders like Orrin Porter Rockwell enforced the church's version of law and order, which sometimes clashed with federal law enforcement in the area.
Federal government, wary of the influence of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints held, often had tense relations with the territory. Federal marshals were sent to ensure that federal laws were followed, leading to conflicts over polygamy and other practices deemed controversial.
These tensions came to a head with the federal crackdown on polygamy, which led to arrests and legal battles that would continue into the late 19th century. This was a unique aspect of Utah's Wild West, where religious law and federal law often collided.
The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 was a transformative moment for Utah, linking the rest of the nation. The railroad brought new people, new industries, and a sense of connectedness to the once isolated territory.
The railroad revolutionized life in Utah, accelerating the economy by making it easier to transport goods like minerals, cattle, and crops. But it also brought its own set of challenges, including more outsiders who were often unfamiliar with Utah's unique social dynamics.
With the railroad, towns like Ogden became major transportation hubs, while it brought economic growth. It also brought crime, as saloons, brothels, and gambling halls sprang up to entertain workers and travelers. The arrival of the railroad marked the beginning of the end for Utah's Wild West era, as law and order began to catch up with the once untamed frontier. One unique feature of Utah's landscape was the Outlaw Trail, a series of rugged routes that connected hideouts throughout Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. This network allowed outlaws like Butch Cassidy to evade capture and continue their lives of crime.
The Outlaw Trail was part of the legend of the Wild West, a place where fugitives could escape and regroup. It became famous, and although a few outlaws could use it forever, it allowed them to evade law enforcement longer than they could have elsewhere.
By the late 1900s, the era of the outlaw was ending. Advances in transportation, communication, and the increasing presence of law enforcement meant that the Wild West, as it had been known, was fading into history. Towns settled down, and more stable society began to take root. As we wrap up, let's reflect on the legacy of Utah's Wild West era. The stories of outlaws, lawmen, Native American resistance, and pioneer settlements have shaped Utah's cultural identity. This period has left a lasting mark on the state's landscape, from its ghost towns to its preserved historical sites.
While much of the Wild West has been mythologized, Utah's story contains both real heroes and hardships, creating a complex and fascinating chapter in American history. It reminds us of a time when life on the frontier was a raw, dangerous, and unpredictable experience.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Undiscovered Utah and for this exploration of Utah's Wild West. We hope you've enjoyed these stories and gained a deeper appreciation for this remarkable period in history. If you've enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with anyone who enjoys exploring. I want to thank Rook for joining us on the show tonight and for his input into these stories. Thank you, Rook.
Of course, JB.
Please join us next time as we share more about the Great Southwest. Good night, everybody.